Hello and welcome to the BookTube channel, Jack in the Book Stack, where I talk about a wide variety of book genres and the bookish lifestyle. And in this reading vlog, I'm going to be focusing on the genre of classics. It is my 2024 goal to read 6 of them this year, and in my January TBR video, I actually put it to you guys to see which one I should kick the year off with. And it seemed to be like a landslide victory. It seems that Madame Bovary is the book that you guys want to see me read. And I'm really excited that this one was chosen. It has been on my TBR for forever. So let's cut to Jack from the past and how I pitched this book by reading the summary from GoodReads to convince everybody to make this their pick. Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. This is translated from French, which is really cool. So the character lives beyond her means in order to escape the banalities and emptiness of provincial life, which sounds amazing. And also the term provincial life, I have never heard anywhere outside of that Beauty and the Beast song, like the opening scene that Belle is singing. So anyways, that's a tangent. When the novel was first serialized in La Revue de Paris between October 1st, 1856 and December 15th, 1856, public prosecutors attacked the novel for obscenity. The resulting trial in January 1857 made the story notorious. After Flaubert's acquittal in February 1857, Madame Bovary became a bestseller in April 1857 when it was published in 2 volumes. A seminal work of literary realism, the novel is now considered Flaubert's masterpiece and one of the most influential literary works in history. So that is all really interesting. It doesn't really tell you what this is about though, does it? So going into it kind of blind, but the idea that it was so controversial, I think this would be a really fun read, especially to do a reading vlog on, to kind of compare what was so shocking about this story then versus today. Seems like it might be kind of spicy. So I don't know, that aspect has me so intrigued. That summary has me super intrigued to check this one out. As I mentioned, I'm really curious what was so scandalous about this book. So that is the perspective I'm going into this read with, what I want to discover. But I did pick up this edition, which I will be annotating, and it has a summary on the back. So let me read that real fast so we know generally what this is about. Flaubert's erotically charged and psychologically acute portrayal of a married woman's affairs caused a moral outcry on its publication in 1857. Its heroine, Emma Bovary, is stifled by provincial life as the wife of a doctor. An ardent devourer of sentimental novels, she seeks escape in fantasies of high romance, in voracious spending, and eventually in adultery. But even her affairs bring her disappointment, and when real life continues to fail to live up to her romantic expectations, the consequences are devastating. The novel was deemed so lifelike that many women claimed they were the model for his heroine, but Flaubert insisted, Madame Bovary, c'est moi. Very interesting. So I am really looking forward to this read. I'm so hyped up. If nothing else, just the reputation that this book garnered for itself. So first things first, I need to come up with my annotation strategy. So I am going to research this book a little bit. I'm going to locate my material. So I like reading classics alongside Spark Notes, or there's another website I often use called Lit Notes that has different themes and symbolism and things to look out for. I warn you in doing this yourself though, because I have spoiled myself more than once in doing this. Like Spark Notes assumes that you've read this before, and so when I was doing Anna Karenina, they spoiled the main plot twist. They spoiled the end for me. And then Great Expectations spoiled the plot twist. Like I was so mad in both those situations. So go into that cautiously. This reading vlog will be spoiler free, so don't worry about it. I'm going to come up with my annotation strategy, share it with you so that you can always copy that and do that if you want to read this and annotate it. I'm going to tell you about my reactions, I'm going to tell you the plot, and overall, like I said, I want to see why this was so scandalous back then and how it would be perceived now, because I think society is very different than when this was published in 1857. So it'll be fun. Let's go ahead and get started. After a cursory review of SparkNotes, I think I have decided how I want to annotate Madame Bovary. So I typically like to annotate the themes, but without spoiling myself by reading the descriptions here on SparkNotes, just looking at the headers, there's nothing that really calls to me about what I want to tag in this book. It seems that I can expect themes of the inadequacy of language, the powerlessness of women, the failures of the bourgeois, I don't know how to pronounce that word, and that's it. So as you can see, there was nothing that really called to me in the themes, so that is one way I'm going to deviate from the usual. Never fear though, I do have another plan for my annotations. These three are pretty standard for me when I annotate a classic. I'm going to use pink for moments that I love, orange for quotes that I like, and these colors, which look the same in the pages of the book, I will use for character introductions and descriptions. The new categories I'm going to use specific to Madame Bovary are: I will use blue tabs for moments that I think are relatable. In reading the description of this book, the restlessness is something that I find very relatable. So I'm curious what really passes down to modern day from this book. Also for purple, I want to highlight things that are controversial, either for that time or possibly even controversial today. I'm really excited about this annotation strategy. I can't wait to dive in. I'm back now that I have finished Madame Bovary, and if you're still here with me, it must mean that's because you also love classics, classic reading vlogs, classic book reviews, that kind of thing. So I know the playlist that I'm linking down below will be just what you're looking for. I brought out the other 2 editions that I own of this book because, yes, I am a book shopping addict. So naturally, I would have 3 editions of one book that I haven't even read before. But I am so happy to tell you that I f***ing loved this book. This gave me everything I was looking for when I initially picked up Anna Karenina, but didn't get. That book really fell flat for me, whereas this one delivered. But I have to be honest with you, just reading the book, I probably liked it, but reading it parallel with SparkNotes gave me such a different perspective. That's what really elevated the read for me. In the description box down below, you'll find the link to SparkNotes where I looked up all the information on Madame Bovary. I am going to cite it a lot in this book review because there was so much that I read that I want to share with you guys, but if I shared everything, this video would be like an hour long. So I'm only going to show the cream of the crop highlights. I've already told you my overall reaction to this book, that I loved it, but now I want to dive into things a little bit more specifically. I want to talk about the plot, my annotation strategy and how that turned out. I want to talk about the writing style, and I want to talk about the characters. I don't have too much more to say about the plot other than what I said in the beginning of this video when I was reading the summary on the back of the book. The plot doesn't get too much more intricate from there. Really, there's not a lot of twists and turns or surprises. The specialness of this book is really in the writing style and the characters, which I will dive into in a little bit. But like I mentioned, this is about Emma Bovary, and I did see the theme highlighted in the plot of the powerlessness of women. We really see that Emma's only power is in her sexuality and being desired, and even that is really temporary and at the whims of men. Emma makes bad decision after bad decision, and that's really what the plot of this book is about. So you have to kind of like unlikable characters to enjoy the plot of this. It did kind of bum me out that SparkNotes did spoil the plot for me. I mentioned that sometimes it does that, and it did so here. So even though SparkNotes added a lot to my reading experience and it was worth it for me, that was a little bit of a bummer. So it does things like when it's introducing a character to you in the beginning, it will say things like, and this led to their ultimate death at the end of the book. Or it will say, this is foreshadowing for when XYZ happens later in the story. And you're like, I didn't know those things were going to happen, so that takes the mystery out of it. So the plot was a little bit spoiled for me in that regard, but it didn't spoil my whole enjoyment of the book. An update on how my annotation strategy turned out for Madame Bovary. So the typical ones that I do, the pink for moments I love, orange for quotes, and green for new characters, not too much to report there. I used them all, and I used them a lot because there were standout elements in those sections, but really for the specific ones I used. So I used blue for relatability, and there was a lot of that. It was really fascinating. So I love the descriptions of boredom. That was something that I think a lot of us can relate to. And for me particularly, when I was in my 20s, I was super restless. And so the descriptions there, I absolutely related to. We have Emma and some of the other characters looking at their life and really asking themselves, is this it? Is this all there is to it? This is all I'm gonna get? And there's an element of comparison to what others have that they want. And what really was thought-provoking for me in this is how this is even more relevant today with social media. I think I'm just surrounded by Madame Bovary's. And this is really perpetuated nowadays with social media, keeping up with the Joneses, wanting what you don't have, overspending and leveraging yourself to give a certain image. It was very interesting and relevant today. I want to talk about the purple tabs though. That's what I use to indicate scandalous or controversial moments. As you recall, that's exactly why I picked up this book, because I wanted to see why it was so outrageous, why it caused such an uproar and a controversy when it was published in the 1850s, and wanted to see like how that compares to modern day and what we deem acceptable now. So there was a lot of it, and I think the back of the book where it says that this is erotically charged, I found myself really tagging things that fit that description. Some things where Emma bent down to pick something up and then the guy would come behind her and like press himself against her and like bend down to pick it up as well. Moments like that, or moments of a lot of tension, romantic tension between our characters, or when they observe different body parts of each other. There was a lot of that, but the most famous scene, and I thank SparkNotes for this, for highlighting it, because It's something that I definitely knew what was going on, but I didn't catch all of it. Like, I'm a very literal reader, okay? Symbolism is lost on me a lot of times, and so I like that I have something that points out what the author's intentions were or could have possibly been. So I want to read this part. This is from part 3, and it's about the carriage ride, a carriage ride that Emma goes on with a lover. And I'm going to leave his name out of it because I don't want to spoil anything for you. I mean, I don't think it's a huge spoiler, but still, I want to keep this spoiler free. So let me just read this. The carriage ride is one of the most famous scenes in Madame Bovary because it illustrates Cynichach, I don't know how to pronounce that word, a literary figure in which part of something stands for its entirety. The description of the carriage's movements stands in for a description of Emma and her lover making love, and the panting exhaustion of the carriage driver stands in for the panting exhaustion of the lovers within the carriage. The further the carriage goes, the further we know Emma and her lover have gone. So even Flaubert's long list of the districts they visit contributes to growing our sense of certainty that Emma and her lover are consummating their affair inside the carriage. Finally, the hand thrust forth at the very end of the scene to discard the torn pieces of her letter signals both Emma's sexual climax and the end of all her resolutions. So I mean, I knew they were doing it in the carriage, but I didn't catch the full description of how, like, when I was reading it, I was like, why is he listing all these different districts they're going through? This is a lot of detail. I don't care. And why do we care about the carriage driver and that he's tired from going on this long journey? This is a lot of unnecessary detail. But I didn't link it to that being like symbolism for what was going on in the carriage. And, you know, if the carriage is a rockin', don't come a knockin'. If I were to do the annotating over again, I probably would have tagged unlikable moments, either bad decisions, gaslighting, manipulation, moments of extreme naivete, lots of that stuff going on that could have been really fun to tag. And I mentioned one of the themes was a criticism or the failures of, it was that B word I couldn't pronounce, bourgeois, but I Googled it, it just means middle class. So there was a lot of commentary on that could have been really fun to tab as well. Now let's talk about the writing style of Madame Bovary. And this is what I mean when I say spark notes came in really handy, because there were things that I noticed or I observed, but I didn't get the full impact of it. I would be feeling a certain way about a character and didn't necessarily realize that Flaubert put me in that position, put me in those feels because of how he wrote this. And so it gave me a lot of really, really great perspective. So let me give you some examples. I was a little bit disoriented at first. I found it a little bit jarring because page 1, chapter 1, it is a plural first person narrative and we are observing this new kid, Charles, coming to class. So like the we are the classmates talking about this awkward kid joining the class. And I thought that was interesting because I'm like, this is called Madame Bovary. What are we doing here? Then the book switches to third person and we're following Charles. We're getting a little bit of his background, learning about his parents, his upbringing, him going to medical school. And again, I'm like, okay, well, I recognize the name Bovary, so that's good, but what are we doing here? Then he meets Emma. And so I'm like, okay, she's probably going to be important here. And so we learn about Emma through Charles's perspective first, which is kind of an interesting take. Then after they get married, we switch to learning more about her. From that point on, we are primarily in Emma's point of view, but we do flip to some others at times, which, trust me, adds a lot. I also mentioned that I tabbed a lot of blue for relatability when it came to the descriptions of boredom, and the writing around that was very, very beautiful. I think that's what made it so special, and you can just put yourself in that place and you know that trapped feeling where you just can't escape, you don't know what to do. All the options, they just seem pointless. I loved that kind of anxiety, hopeless feeling that was portrayed through the writing style with boredom. SparkNotes touched on this writing style as well. So it says that Madame Bovary became so famous in part because of its innovative narrative technique. Flaubert matches his prose style to his narrative subject with remarkable accuracy. When Emma is bored, the text seems to crawl. When she is engaged, it flies. And again, this is something that I noticed. I'm like, why are we going into such detail, painstaking detail of what everybody is wearing and what they're doing, what they're drinking, how they're feeling, the naps they take? Why? And I noticed I was skimming a little bit. And so I guess you could say that Flaubert purposely made me bored to feel what Emma was feeling when she was also bored, and she's surrounded by all these details like she doesn't care about. And then you get wrapped up, the pace gets faster when she's engaged in something, which when she's engaged in something, it's because it's something new. It's very, like, the novelty hasn't worn off yet. And so I did notice that pace picked up, and that's when I was super engaged in the reading as well. So that's one of the examples I mean that I had no idea that I was feeling the way I was feeling because Flaubert wrote it that way to put me there. There is a scene in the book where there is a declaration of love between Emma and her lover, so not her husband. And they're at this fair, so they're like sneaking away. It's like a high tension moment, high emotion. And this was one that was super interesting. Looking at SparkNotes again, it puts into words the importance of the writing style here. Flaubert cuts back and forth between the scene of seduction and the speech on morality delivered by the bureaucratic official at the fair. In every instance, the official's pompous words emphasize the insincere passion the lover displays towards Emma. When he tells her he loves her, for example, the official presents a local farmer the award for first prize in manure. As the scene continues, Flaubert heightens the pace by including shorter and shorter segments from each speech until we hear single sentences intercut with each other. And so this was an interesting, like, I could see this cinematically, right? Because the speech on morals, like he would say something and then would cut to the declaration of love and go back and forth, and it's right, it would go faster and faster and the statement shorter and shorter. So that was really cool. I mean, I caught that parallel while I was reading it, but that's a great example to highlight what was so special about the writing style here. One of the sections I highlighted in the book as a section I loved on page 115 was where Emma is reflecting on her feelings for another man. But the flames were subsiding, either because the fuel was running low or because it was piled too high. Love was gradually dimmed by absence, regrets were smothered by habit, and the glare of the fires that had crimsoned her pale skin now thickened and faded slowly into shadow. In the stagnation of her consciousness, she even mistook disgust with her husband for an aspiration towards her lover, the scorch of hatred for the warmth of tenderness. But since the storm was still blowing and passion burned to ashes, no help came, no sun appeared. Black night was all around her, and she was quite lost in her bitter cold that traveled through her. So descriptive, and so many comparisons I really loved. I really, really love the writing style in this book. Now let's talk about the characters. And a lot of my observations and part of my review also bleeds over to writing style, because a lot of this is the perspective we have and the descriptions provided, but just bear with me. Emma Bovary, our title character. She is constantly at battle within herself between these big romantic expectations and also discontent with her current life and situation. She's always disappointed, no matter what she does, that her life and her reality doesn't match what she has read in the books. I think a lot of us can relate to that. She is absolutely always looking for the next best thing, always trying to keep up with the Joneses, even, as we say today. And it's interesting because when she looks back on her life at various points in the book, she always looks back on them with fondness. And you're like, no, that's not what you were saying when you were in that situation. She goes from growing up in a convent to living with her father on a farm. She goes to get married. She tries motherhood. And each time she enters into these new phases of her life, she thinks, this is it. This is what's going to make me happy. And it doesn't quite live up to her expectations. And what's interesting is that these phases of her life aren't all that bad. She is securely in the middle class. She doesn't have to complete manual labor to earn food and a roof over her head. She is very comfortable financially. So it's not that any of these situations are bad. It's just the novelty wears off. She gets bored again and she's looking for something new. But then she's always looking back like, oh, I remember when I was happy at the convent. Those were simpler times. There's one scene in particular that really made my opinions of Emma very, very clear. So her and her husband go to this ball held by a very rich person. And of course, she is just dazzled by all the glitz and glam. She has the time of her life. She has a dance with a Viscount. Is it Viscount? Viscount. I think it's a Viscount. She dances with him and she gets swept up in how romantic his life might be, what it would be like to be his mistress, what it would be like to attend these balls all the time. And she just sees herself as super entertaining and amazing. But again, when it comes to the writing style, we flip perspectives and we actually see from like the larger group, nobody cares that she's there. Nobody's paying her any attention. Nobody is talking to her. And even the Viscount, so Emma thinks this was this big romantic dance and it was nothing to him or anybody else. Like nobody cared. It was one dance and he moved to the next. But she has this whole romanticized thing in her head and she cannot let go of this ball for the longest time. And this is where we get kind of that comparison or wanting what other people have. She's like, gosh, if I just lived that kind of lifestyle, that is what would make me happy. I mentioned that she makes bad decision after bad decision. She is very easily manipulated into getting into debt herself and her family. And it's interesting because what SparkNotes points out is as her morals decline, so do the state of her finances. So that was a very interesting correlation as well. Now let's talk about Charles, her husband. He is very clearly an oaf. He is awkward, he is clumsy, he is painfully naive. Like, he is actually facilitating his wife's affair without even realizing it. There's all these signs in front of him and he, I think, actively chooses to ignore it and make excuses for her. And that could be really, really frustrating, but I thought it was kind of endearing and kind of nice because even though he's frustrating in that way, I think that he is actually in love with her like those fairy tale fictional stories that she so craves. Like that's the irony of it, is she wants this like big, substantial, dazzling love and she actually has it, but she's annoyed by it. She is annoyed anytime he touches her or kisses her or gives her compliments. And oh my gosh, the way they describe the sounds this man makes when he chews, you know she's aggravated. You know that kind of, I think we can all relate to that, where you're just so annoyed with someone. Maybe it's your partner, maybe you do love them, but there's just times when everything they do grates on your nerves, like how they brush their teeth or hold a fork or whatever it is, right? There's so many great descriptions of that, and I don't know, I kind of like this bumbling idiot. Now let's talk about Rodolphe. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, but that's how I am going to pronounce it. But he is this very rich, sophisticated man that lives nearby. So of course Emma like over romanticizes this situation and she is attracted to him. He takes notice because she is pretty cute, but he's not a good guy. He sees Emma as prey, as a conquest. And he's actually really happy that she's married because he won't get stuck with her. He has a plan to seduce Emma. Emma has this big romantic idea of falling in love and running away with him, but the novelty of the relationship starts to wear off. And again, with the writing style and the perspective, I love seeing Emma from his perspective, because even though you hate him, like he is a villain, but the way he views Emma when she starts driving him crazy and she's controlling and overdramatic and just super, super over the top. Again, I don't think at any point you're supposed to like Emma, but this really just makes her a joke almost. Like, I don't know how to say this. Like, you cannot take her seriously. SparkNotes also pointed out for me how many of the side characters here had a purpose. The priest, the pharmacist, the innkeeper, the blind beggar. A lot of them represented something, either to be like the complete antithesis to Emma's discontent, someone who was very satisfied and happy in their situation, or to highlight how Emma really was pretty well off and had a lot of things that she could have been grateful for, or criticism on the church. Love to see that controversy in older classic literature. But there were so many different purposes to these characters. Again, I probably would have just brushed past them as just being like another element of the story, like another plot point, but seeing the substance brought in through SparkNotes was really, really cool. Those are all the main points that I wanted to highlight from my read of Madame Bovary. This is something that I finished this last night, okay? So it's not like it's been sitting with me for a long time, but I cannot get this out of my head. There's so many people in like my everyday life that I thought of when reading this. And again, with social media and comparing ourselves to the lives of others, especially like the highlight reel of others, like so much relatability here even today. And just seeing the destruction that this discontent brought to Emma and like how it impacted everyone around her was really cool. Again, I think you have to really enjoy unlikable characters that make bad decisions in order to really enjoy this book. And again, if I read this without SparkNotes, I think it would have been like a 3-star because it was entertaining, but like just the plot, like all this other substance and really observing the intention behind the writing style is what pushed this up to a 5-star read for me. Really enjoyed this, really got a lot out of the experience. If I haven't said that enough times already. So I think I'm gonna cut it off here because I could talk, like I said, for an hour or more about this book and all the things that I learned and experienced. It was incredible. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I will see you in the next video.